Welcome back to the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft podcast. My name is Chris Speir, and I'm going to be your guide to enjoying the great outdoors. So today we're diving into a new chapter, shelter. We're following along in the book Primitive Camping and Bushcraft, and we're on page 78 where it kicks off the shelter section. So over the next few weeks, we're going to explore various aspects of shelter, how it's set up and how to set up your camp, what kind of shelter to bring, how do you make your own shelter when it's needed, stuff like that. So we've touched on this before, but now we're going to do a real big detail. It's going to be in great detail. So let's think about shelter for just one moment. When it comes to shelter, what is the first thing that you think of? What is the most dynamic thing that you can have as a shelter in your life? Your house, your home, your apartment, wherever you live, wherever you lay your head at night, that is shelter. That is the most basic form or advanced form of shelter. It's really advanced. The reason why is because it keeps you safe. It keeps you warm. It keeps you comfortable. It's got all the amenities in it that you need for a shelter. It's got running water. It's got a stove. It's got beds. It's got everything that you need to keep you safe, to keep you comfortable, to keep you alive inside of it. So a house, an apartment, a home, wherever you're living, that is the most advanced aspect of shelter. So when you're camping, shelter serves the same purpose, but on an extremely smaller scale. Now, a tent is a small house. A hammock can be considered a small house, like a little one-bedroom thing, and that's what it does. So whenever you go out and you bring your tent and everything, you're setting up a micro shelter. Now, in the next one, we're going to be talking about our clothing and how our clothing relates in the shelter situation. But today we're really, really going to concentrate on the types of shelter that we can use, and basically campsite selection. Where can we select a place to build our shelter or put our shelter? So when we go camping, our shelter is our primary, our house, our residence, our abode, and it serves as our place to keep us away from the elements. So my preferred shelter is a lean-to. If I'm not using a hammock, my preferred shelter would be a lean-to type situation, a lean-to setup. And I've made natural lean-tos where I've made it out of natural materials, just sticks and leaves. And, I did a video here on YouTube recently to where back in November, December, I would say recently, but it's been several months back now. And I did this video demonstrating how to make a shelter out of natural material. And I did. I made this shelter, made my bed, laid there, camped out all night. And I had people watch that video and they're like, oh man, it's not good enough. You're going to get rained on all night long. You're going to get rained on if it starts raining. But the part that I didn't include in there is that it did rain all night long and I did not get rained on. So, shelter protects you from the elements. And so this shelter that I made a lean-to, and it actually protected me from all the rain, all the wind, and it got down into the high 30s, about 38, 39, somewhere between 38 and 40 degrees that night. It wasn't too bad. So, but down here in South Mississippi, I typically use a tarp as a shelter, and we're going to get into building complex structures with a tarp here in the next few episodes. But essentially what's going to happen with the tarp is you're going to use the tarp as your shelter. Tarp is the most amazing, most effective way to make a shelter in the woods. You don't have to work to death to get leaves and everything and sticks and all this stuff, but a tarp is going to do everything that you need it to do. So the Double D 3x3 tarp, or 3 meters by 3 meters, is lightweight. It's very versatile. It's effective for pretty much anything. It'll keep the rain, the wind, the sun. It keeps all that off, and it generates a climate for you to have shelter to sleep under, and it will actually make you a very good shelter from the elements. So let's move on to key factors on campsite selection. So selecting the right site, and that's on page 79 of the book here. It is basically, it's an excerpt from the U.S. Army Survival Handbook, or the Survival Manual. And when you're reading this, a lot of it is, you have to keep in mind that they, when they wrote this, is evading enemy forces, evading enemy, being able to evade the enemy without being seen. And if you were shot down or left behind enemy lines, a lot of the concepts in that book were designed for you to survive and not get caught. But it has also been used as an amazing little source of survival and camping, and a lot of modern survival books are based off of the U.S. Army Survival Manual. And a lot of survival books today have, even my camping book, I have referenced the U.S. Army Survival Handbook, and there's excerpts in there. So according to the U.S. Army Survival Handbook, when selecting a shelter, 2 prerequisites must be met. Now, these two prerequisites are pretty important. It must contain the materials required to make the type of shelter you need. And number 2, it must be large enough and level enough for you to lie down comfortably. Now, when they're talking about lie down comfortably, large enough for you to lie down comfortably, they're talking about making a small personal size shelter whenever you're evading the enemy. And they're talking about climbing up in a log or sleeping next to a log and making you a little something with leaves on it to keep you warm and not having a fire, stuff like that. But when you're talking about a primitive camping aspect, it still applies. You want to have a place where you can lay down and be comfortable. All right. So then you should also consider, is it suitable for signaling in the event of an emergency if you're lost or injured? Now, if you're out in the woods enjoying your primitive camping trip, most of the time you're not going to be signaling for others to come get you. And so, but you always want to be prepared in the event that something does happen. Would you be able to get a hold of someone for rescue? Let's say you trip, fell, and you got punctured in an artery with a stick that you chopped off at an angle when you weren't supposed to, and you're bleeding out. And are you going to be able to signal for help? Are you going to be able to call for help? Do you have the tools that you need to stop the bleeding then and still look for help? Does this place protect you from wild animals? Now, wild animals, they're going to do what wild animals are going to do. Most of them are curious. Most of them are looking for food. And whenever they come up into your camp, they're looking for food. And that's majority of it. Now, what's really dangerous is when you have individuals that feed wild animals, and then these wild animals attribute humans to food. Now, case in point is most of these ridiculous businesses in South Louisiana where they take you on swamp tours and they feed the alligators. That is ridiculous. So now when you go out into a boat, these 12, 13 foot long alligators will swim up to your boat expecting to get fed. And you don't do that. You don't do that. It's dangerous. Now, with any wild animal, it is dangerous if you feed them. You want to consider, is the place that you're selecting free from insects, reptiles, and poisonous plants. Now, you're not going to be free of insects. Now, you can minimize where let's use mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are pretty much worldwide. Um, Mosquitoes are ridiculous. Like you can minimize your bites and you can minimize where mosquitoes are. Like down here in the South, water, anywhere near the water, anywhere in the world, anywhere near water is going to have more mosquitoes. Then anywhere near high grass is going to have certain types of mosquitoes. Some mosquitoes are born on the grass. Some mosquitoes are born in the water. But the majority of the time, if you got water, you got mosquitoes. So the last episode, I talked about a thermocell, which was an amazing little thing to bring with you to keep mosquitoes away. And those things are exactly what I said, amazing at keeping mosquitoes away. So when choosing your campsite, here's what you need to consider. This is the bottom line. All right. Proximity to water, your proximity to firewood. Those two things you have to have. You have to have water to drink, and you have to have firewood to keep warm if you're sleeping in a cold environment. Now, with that being said, my recent kayaking trip video on YouTube, I did a kayaking trip where we went and we stayed overnight, and it was in the middle of August. Did not have to have a fire. The only reason we had a fire was to cook our food and to warm our food up. But other than that, in the wintertime, a fire is going to be paramount to keeping you warm, and it actually helps boost the morale, stuff like that. Now, in this campsite, you need to have the materials available to create a shelter if you did not bring one. Now, when you're creating a shelter, we'll get into this later on, and we've referenced it several times. If you're making a shelter from scratch, like a lean-to or a debris hut or something of that nature, you need to have enough materials around where you can do that. Excuse me. Now, there are safety considerations in the site that you're selecting, and that would be like dead standing trees, high water marks on the trees to make sure that you're not sleeping in a place that could flood if there was a flash flood. And then that brings me to flash floods, avalanches, and rock slides. There's always some kind of danger, and some people I've watched a video where a fellow was demonstrating how to make a fire, and he did it in a cave, and he lit the fire. The fire warmed up the rocks started cracking, and his shelter not exploded, but caved in. And he got out okay, but his shelter, it caved in. You don't build fires inside your caves, stuff like that. There's certain things that you need to know, and certain things that you just don't do. And that's one of them, but you don't want to camp out where there's going to be flash floods in the event that it rains. You don't want to camp out in places where an avalanche is going to happen, where it's prone, steep terrain, avalanches, loud noises. You always see these movies where people made a loud noise and then all of a sudden the avalanche started. Rock slides do the same thing. You don't want to go in a place where there's going to be rock slides and stuff like that happening. Now, wildlife protection in Mississippi, the biggest nuisance here really is the raccoons. Raccoons will venture up to your camp looking for something to eat. Majority of the time, if you got a fire, they're scared of it. But if you walk off for a little while, there's nobody there, nobody's making noise or something, a raccoon it can come up into your camp. But there's other places outside of Mississippi that, bears and other wildlife will come up into your camp looking for food. And we just touched on that just a second ago. Majority of everything is the animal is hungry. The animal is looking for food. They don't have a Sack and Save or a Piggly Wiggly or a Walmart to run down and buy their food from. They're constantly hunting. They're constantly running around looking for something to eat. And that is the reason why these things show up. They associate humans with food, or humans do silly stuff like actually cooking their food in their camp, and then the smell invites them into the camp. So there's different camping styles. Primitive camping means fewer amenities. Primitive camping primitive camping means fewer amenities, as if you were taking a truck and going car camping or something like that. You can bring fewer stuff with you. But also, on the other hand, primitive camping is you bring more amenities with you than you would if you were practicing bushcraft or survival type camping situations, stuff like that. You carry your gear and you set up less structured areas. So you carry your gear to where you're going and you are in less structured areas. Now, there are developed campsites, like in some of these little wildlife areas and stuff like that, there are developed camping areas. And we're going to get into this in a little bit. I'm going to give you a resource that I'll leave in the notes of the video and the notes of the podcast. But, when you get out into the woods, you're going to look for a place to camp out using the prerequisites from the U.S. Army Survival Handbook. And then, making sure that there's no dead trees and stuff like that. But there is other aspects of primitive camping as well that they call primitive camping. And that is where you have these pay to camp places, like state parks or national parks or stuff like that, where they call it primitive. And the reason it's primitive is because there's no water or electricity, but there is a fire ring and you could just pull your vehicle up to it, or your camper, or you could set a camp, tent up, or do whatever you want, camp out, get up the next morning and leave, bring your own firewood, that kind of stuff. And these are called developed sites. And, they already have their fire rings, or they have preset camping areas throughout this large swath of property. And I prefer myself to go off the beaten path and find my own spot to camp. And that is a very, very relaxing thing for me. One, I get out into nature. I get away from the beaten path. I'm not going to be running into people, and I get to set up a camp and really enjoy what I went to go do. I get to unplug from, reality in order to recharge my batteries. So we already talked about, according to the U.S. Army Survival Handbook, your campsite must provide enough space and materials to build your shelter. It should be large enough and level enough for you to lay down, blah, blah, blah. But, insects and stuff like that, we talked about that. And I don't know why it's on my list twice to talk about. But so I got a fella that I've come to know. His name's Scott Owens, and he is a GIS analyst, and he helps campers find great primitive camping spots using his geospatial mapping expertise. And this fella, you send him an email, you say, hey, look, I'm looking at camping in this area or something like that. And this is generally, I think, for the South. He's really doing like the South areas right now. But he'll go and look in on the maps, and he will find a suitable place for you to park your car, and then hiking through the woods to a certain location that looks suitable according to the data that he processes for you to set up a camp. And he'll have all the amenities that you need, such as fire, water, and firewood, and stuff like that. And a great resource for you to have. He charges like $15, and you can get a detailed PDF. I think it's like 60 pages or something like that. But you get a very detailed PDF, and it has recommended camping spots, weather forecasts, and like I said, I'll leave his information in the show notes here. And I think that would be a good resource if he does it for your local area. Now, in the future, we're going to be, next episode, we're going to be talking about clothing. But for the next 5 weeks or something like that, we're going to be really hitting up the shelter section. And we're really going to be breaking it down. We're really going to be talking about what shelter is. Now, today we just briefly talked about, walking in, doing a site selection, and talked about how shelter is like your microclimate. And that's all shelter really is. It's a microclimate that you can walk into and stay warm, stay dry, stay stay healthy, and keep you out of the elements and stuff like that. So that's pretty much going to be it for today. And this one was a relatively short one. There's going to be a couple of more little short ones coming up, but thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Remember to go down into the description of this podcast or this video, wherever you're listening or wherever you're watching. Go ahead and check out Scott's details. I will put that in the details. So next time we're going to dive into clothing. We're going to really break down what clothing is and how clothing is your first layer of shelter. We have discussed this briefly with a 35,000 foot flyover, and I know we hit this running this morning, but we're going to actually slow down and we're going to get into the details. We're going to get into how to set this up. We're going to talk step by step how to make several variations of tarp shelters. We're going to talk step by step how to do prosec knots, how to do ridge lines, stuff like that. So that's coming up in the next couple of episodes. But the next episode is going to be all about clothing and how clothing fits into the shelter aspect. So if you haven't already, grab your copy of Primitive Camping and Bushcraft, and it is available on all major online retailers. And we're in page, let's see, the shelter section starts on page 76. And we're going to go all the way through to page, let's see here. What is this? Page 99. And so that we're going to be covering that over the next couple of weeks. And I really appreciate you following along, coming in, listening to me. And if you got any comments or anything, if you're watching the video, leave a comment on the video. Let me know what you think. Go ahead and do the ratings. I invite you to rate this thing on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. If you don't mind, please just leave me a rating there. Leave me, how does it help you? Is it helping you? I mean, be honest with you. If it sucks, just tell me it sucks. I'm a big boy, I can handle it. But I'm just asking you to leave a rating and let me know what you think about this. Is it helping you? Is it not helping you? Is there something else that we need to start doing with it? All right. I appreciate you so much for stopping by. I appreciate you so much. And I will see you in the very next video and the next podcast. God bless you.